Welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report powered by Caliber Mind. Our goal on the RMR is to help marketers move from subject matter experts to strategic business partners. I'm your host, Camela Thompson, and today I'm thrilled to introduce Allye O'Brien. Allye, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I am currently Director of Revenue Operations at Chief, soon to be Director of Sales at Alma. My background is as an individual contributor and then also as a sales leader before moving into the operations world to kind of round out some of my experience in being an operator, a product and project manager, and really help with strategic growth within a revenue organization.
So I think it's a little bit unusual. I've heard other folks move from sales to operations, but rarely back to sales.
Yeah.
So I'd love to talk a little bit about what first drew you to operations.
Yeah, so this has to go back a little while. I was not a good math student in high school and college, and it really was not my strength in terms of understanding numbers until I became a sales associate at Anthropologie and worked in retail and began to really get an understanding for the direct impact that your work can have on revenue numbers. So when I moved into the corporate side of selling as a seller and then as a sales leader, I began to really love to see kind of what makes a team tick and what makes a salesperson tick in terms of being able to affect that final revenue number, what impacts it, what drives it, what activities can really move the needle, so to speak, up and to the right. And so I got into operations from the sales side because I was super interested in where in the data can I understand where to make a change, and then what does that change need to be from an operational standpoint?
That's so interesting because I think I'm just going to say it, a lot of women are kind of intimidated by numbers because we hear when we're young, especially when we were younger, that girls just aren't as good at math. And I was really lucky. I had a trigonometry teacher who was a woman. She sat me down and explained things 5 different ways until it finally clicked. And you have that moment where it's like, oh, I see the patterns now. I get it.
Yeah, exactly.
It just opens up everything. So I'm so glad you found numbers.
Thank you. I'm glad I did too.
The other thing I will say is that it's not just numbers, right? So you're talking about what motivates people and what moves things up and to the right. There's so much psychology in there too. It's not just numbers.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of psychology there. And then there's also a lot of change management that's necessary in terms of how to actually get those numbers to change. When you can see an end result or a way to go about changing it, it's how do you get others to make that change too?
Oh, absolutely. How do you convince them it's their idea? Yeah.
Exactly. Or that they want to be bought into your idea.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. But with a sales background, I imagine I see some introverted folks really struggling with, they see it in the numbers. They think everybody should see it in the numbers, and they don't realize everybody thinks the same way. I imagine you had a bit more experience having to convince people.
I had a bit more experience with it, but from a sales leader perspective, which is an incredibly different vehicle for convincing than being an operational leader is. And that was really something that surprised me, because when you are leading a team of 10, 15, 20 people and you say, hey guys, this is a change we have to make and here's how and why we have to make it. This is your team. They're already bought in on you. They already believe in you. They've already followed your leadership this far. When you are in a different department and you're coming in and saying, hey guys, this is the change we need to make. This is why we need to make it. And this is how we need to make it. You're an outsider. And in many ways, it can be viewed as having a negative impact potentially on the team. And so it's how do you get the buy-in to say, yes, it's good from a data perspective, but it's also best from a people process perspective for you and an experience perspective from the client.
I think that's so critical for people in operations to hear and understand, is that you have to lead it with what's in it for them. And there has to be a component that does make things better for them in some way. So
definitely.
It's our responsibility to advocate for the end users. And if we're always asking for data and not giving them anything back, that's not going to go over well. So maybe we take the position of, we're asking you to fill out this thing, but as part of this process, we went through and removed these 5 other things to make things go faster,
Exactly.
Give and take.
Exactly. Shrink the change for them, I think, is really important.
Love it. Love it. So data is complicated. We both have quite the background in startups, early stage startups in particular. And we've both seen some hurdles in the C-suite around data, particularly on my side with marketing. I've seen it quite a bit. When should we push for them to stop fixating on a detail? And when do we encourage them to actually dig in and try to find the reason behind those details?
I think it's all in how you set it up. And you mentioned it a little bit, which is how do you get them to think it was their idea? How do you get them to think that this is a data point that needs to be dug in on? And how do you get them to not be worried or concerned or curious about a different data point?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's, for me, a matter of framing and perspective. This number has gone down. Here's why, and here's what we're doing about it, and move on. Unless it's an area that you do want to dig into, which is then you can open up the discussion and say, however, I'd love your feedback on this, which makes them open to the idea of digging into that data point. On the flip side of that, it's I'm confident and I'm asking for your trust that I am going to move the needle on this metric, on this end result, on this goal to get us to where we need to go. You know, one of the most successful experiences that I've seen in startups is when the C-suite really gives trust to the leaders that they've brought in. And that comes with trusting their gut as well. So you're not only trusting the person, but you're trusting their gut to get things done. CEOs tend to be a lot more analytical, a lot more numbers driven. They want the data behind it. And a lot of sales leaders are more gut driven. And it's really a job to marry the two of them together and to say, like, I see the number. I know it could be better. Here's what we're doing about it. But I need you to trust me that I'm going to get the team where we need to go.
I agree 100%. I would like to dig in a little bit on, in a lot of cases, executives own the number and they want to be responsible for reporting the number in front of everyone and don't bring the analyst in with them. So it's really at that point, the analyst's job to help the executive that's representing your team to understand the story behind the numbers and present the story. Because I had to learn really early on, I think I mentioned this earlier, not everybody sees the patterns right away, and you can't assume that they're going to. So you really have to give them a narrative.
You have to give them a narrative. You also have to connect the dots for them and say, this number is impacted by this one and impacts that one. What's the upstream and downstream effect of the data that they're reporting on, so that they have a full picture, so that when someone inevitably asks a question, they're confidently able to answer it.
Great point. And I've worked with a lot of CEOs. It's funny. So they either had an accounting background or they had a technology background. So the ones with the technology or the accounting background, I struggled with because they're used to working with data out of an ERP. They're used to working with really strict guidelines where numbers have to line up down to the penny.
Exactly.
And in revenue operations,
it doesn't work like that.
no, like it's very much a soft science. You know, there's a lot of with marketing in particular, there's a lot of systems that don't talk to each other. If you're not investing in the analytics machine, you're not going to get a lot of marketing activity tied to revenue, which is really unfortunate. So you're always trying to prove yourself. And it's really hard to convince those executives that Excel is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
So
Excel is not going to cut it. And that report in Salesforce is not going to necessarily always line up with other things as well.
Right. So have you had success in speaking with those CEOs with that financial background and getting them to the point where good enough is good enough?
I've not encountered too many with an accounting background. They're usually tech focused, tech heavy, and operationally backgrounded. But that doesn't mean that they don't come with that same, like, well, this is 7 over here, so it should be 7 over there and 7 on that side as well. One of the things I think could be really helpful is to kind of set the expectation for what the acceptable variant is. What is your kind of expected plus or minus 2%, plus or minus 5%? I guess it depends on the volume of your business and the size of your org. But what is the expected and understood? Like, we have a lot of test opportunities, test accounts, test transactions. We just need to understand are counted because we don't exclude them on every single report. But how do you know that it's just not always going to line up 100% to a T? And have that conversation of, you know, as long as we are within this expected percentage, we are okay.
And it's interesting, CEOs with technical backgrounds, that can be a big struggle in and of itself because they know at least theoretically what should be possible.
Yes.
And it's a matter of managing their expectations because of resource constraints. Most startups, they invest a lot in product development. They're not investing a lot in data infrastructure when it comes to sales and marketing.
It's a big thorn and something that I, need to do a better job of. I think when I started in operations, I was very negative in terms of just being like, no, that can't happen, or being scared to say, yes, however, here's what we need to do that successfully. Here's what is going to need to kind of go on the back burner as a result of pushing this thing up, or here are the resources and support that I'm going to need to get this project accomplished the way that you want it to be done. And I think I've spoken to a lot of other operational rookies, I guess, is what I would consider myself for the first part of this transition, where it's just like, it's really scary to commit to saying yes to something when the person you're committing to saying yes to knows how it should go, how it should be run, and what the possibilities are.
Yeah.
When you know yourself that, yes, it's possible, but I'm lacking resources, I'm lacking support, I'm lacking training, knowledge, access, whatever it is. And so how do you get into a yes and mind frame of yes, and here's what I'm going to need to get it done?
Yeah, defining the gaps and being really precise about it. But there's also a level of trust they have to have in you as well. Because if there's a level of skepticism, it is really hard to convince people to get beyond that, I think.
That I went through an experience hiring an admin on my team, and I was saying, I need an admin. Like, our resourcing is just not up to what we, even close to what we need. And I think I spent 2 months doing a cost benefit analysis and all of this, breaking it down into the cost savings, time savings, what it would get us, the cost benefit. And it was really just to a point where I was thinking to myself, like, I just need an admin. Like, I should be trusted that I know what the team needs in terms of resourcing if it's not going to be, obscene. And I think that's where that trust comes in. And a note for the C-suite hiring revenue operations, be prepared to kind of give up some of that control and trust that they know what they're doing.
Absolutely.
There's an ugly rumor going around marketing land. Attribution was made up by crafty technology marketers. Fortunately, the truth is much less sinister. Attribution is still the best way to understand marketing's return on investment, but a lot of people get it very wrong. Join us on September 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern for a powerhouse panel with some of the best consultants in marketing operations. Past RMR guests Brooke Bartos, Anna Leary, Carrie Picklesheimer, and Andy Carone will share the most common implementation mistakes and tangible things you can do to get the most out of the attribution tool you have today. Visit calibermind.com and click the banner at the top of the page to register today.
So now that you're moving back to sales management, what do you wish other people in sales management knew about operations that you're now taking with you into the role?
They really want the sales team to be successful. Nothing is done for work's sake. Nothing is done just for doing it. It's really done with the endpoint of getting your team to a more successful launching point, and also patience. Something that seems so simple, adding a new field, creating a new report, can have so many bizarre behind the scenes back-end nuances that as a sales leader, when I did not used to have the level or knowledge of Salesforce, access or tools access that I have now, I would just be like, what? This should take 30 seconds. How long does it take to create a new pick list value on this field? And you don't realize it actually could be hooked up to 6 other integrations. It could be used in automation. It could be something that is built specifically this way so that we can accomplish something else in the end. And what seems like a very simple ask to you might actually be a very complicated task for completion for them.
Absolutely. I wish if I could wave a wand.
It's just that all be the case.
Yeah. Just have some empathy. Maybe stop using the word just. Can't you just?
Can't you just? But a lot of the buts. The other thing that goes along with that, I will say though, is explain to us why.
Yeah.
Because we go into a lot of it being like, oh my gosh, I don't want to add another multi-select pick list. But if it's given to us as, here's why I need it specifically the way that I'm asking for it, instead of letting you build it the way you want to or the way you think is best, giving us that why really helps us and empowers us to go, oh, actually, in that case, then I know a faster and better way to do this for you.
Absolutely.
It's not necessarily exactly the way you're asking for it, but it's going to get you what you want in a much faster, less circuitous route. And that really ultimately takes us to a much faster point of execution for you.
Before we did this call, we were talking a little bit and we both had a good laugh about colors on charts and formatting.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I think we've both been there where our primary need is to get the numbers right.
Yes.
And when people get distracted by the colors, it's really frustrating. But I think we both learned that just get the color and formatting out of the way so you can focus on the stuff that matters. So if there's any rookies listening 100%. Out there, just try to be as consistent as possible and be mindful that some people really care about that stuff, and it can really detract from. Yeah, you don't want to go into like some rabbit hole of hex colors and.
No, what I did for that is I just set up at the very beginning an Excel sheet or Google Sheets that had a theme that I set up with the preferred colors of our organization. And then I set up I literally worked in the mind of a marketer or branding, where I set up a design guide for how the font size for the x-axis versus the y-axis versus data labels on all my reports. And I just stuck to it, and it made things a lot simpler, and it will get people's trust in you heightened because it is organized to a way that is pleasing to the eye. So even if the data is not pleasing to the eye necessarily, because it's down and to the left or anything like that, having it formatted properly goes a long way in being able to disseminate that information faster.
It really does. And I appreciate that Salesforce added some flexibility and that you can assign default colors to values so it's consistent month to month, because that is another big sticking point that I've run into. Mm-hmm. Let's dig in and get a little more specific. When is good enough, if ever, for revenue forecasting and budget development?
Oh gosh, that's really what gets tricky. I have always gone by a 5% rule. People tend to use that for commission numbers. If you're at 95%, you're going to get 100% payout. What is considered good enough within the org that we can accept it as perfect? And that's another big tenet of operations. When do you accept great, not perfect, or even good, not perfect? So I say it's a transparent and honest discussion that has to be had with your revenue leader, your C-suite, and then finance and operations to say, all right, guys, what's our variant going to be here? Or variable, I should say, not variant. Delta on the mind. Is it going to be plus or minus 5, plus or minus 10? Where is really our threshold for comfort that if we have hit this, we consider ourselves as in the money, in the green? Where do we consider ourselves in the yellow? And where do we consider ourselves in the red? So setting that middle ground as well is really important. When you know that the finish line is in sight, as opposed to just red or green, black or white, that's a really important, I think, tenet as well for operations to own that conversation and make sure everybody aligns on what good is.
Yeah, and I think having the discussion with especially the CFO and his or her team, and making sure that they understand that without investing in a marketing analytics platform that can unify the data across platforms, you're going to have to be comfortable with directionally accurate. So you're going to have to say, look, I don't have multi-touch attribution. I can't divide ROI across all of these sources. So we're going to have to say, this is the mix that produced this amount, and try to back into that with budgeting. Yeah. And it's tough, but it's really a conversation of, unless you want to invest in better analytics, this is what I can give you.
Yeah, definitely.
And they can talk to their peers in the industry and see what struggles their marketing teams have had. It's so consistent. So it's a good way to advocate for better analytics, and a good way to set some realistic expectations, I think.
Yeah, set those realistic expectations and use the yes and approach. Yes, we can get everything to within the 0.005% accuracy if I'm able to get access to an analyst, a business analyst, a marketing analyst, and a tool to make everything speak together. And you'd be surprised how many people go, then I'm willing to accept less than perfect as great.
Oh yeah, no, that happens all the time. Yeah. And maybe a couple development resources would be great.
Yep, that too.
Then they get super protective and they're okay with fuzzy. Okay. So Allye, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think people get a lot out of it. Where can people find you online for networking?
Yeah, thank you so much. You can find me on LinkedIn, which is Alexandra O'Brien or Allye O'Brien, Allye. Or you can also shoot me an email, allye obrien@gmail.com.
Great. Thank you so much. And for those of you looking for more great material like this, check out calibermind.com.